Okay. Hey guys. So today we're going to be going through training on the core drivers exercise. And I have used this exercise with a lot of people over the last couple of years to be able to help them really get unstuck and to help do a couple different things. One is to get unstuck. So this is specifically like people who are feeling like they're struggling with feeling lost, or they go through repeated bouts of like they're having either things like anxiety type of things, or even feeling like depressive or low, or just generally having a hard sense of either connecting with themselves or connecting where they want to go. And a lot of this conversation starts popping up when I start talking with people about vision. And scripturally, um, it talks about where there's no vision, the people cast off restraint. And vision can be defined as the banks that keep a river flowing in one direction. And so lots of people struggle to try to identify this. And if they can't identify a vision on their life because they think, well, I've got to find kind of like I've got to create my 10-year plan and then my 5-year plan. That's kind of a businessy form of defining one's vision. But a vision just helps to make sure that you're flowing in a singular direction. And so when we take the idea of a vision and we just distill it down from, I have to define, like, I have to right now I'm 38 years old, I have to figure out where I'm going by the time I'm 60. And instead we can think of vision as just a trajectory that we're going to be able to aim for. When we start being able to understand what really drives us internally, we can actually start defining a vision, knowing that that vision or the direction that we're going may not be where we go forever, but we're going to find something that actually lines up with who we are and what our needs are. And so this exercise is really good for doing that. So the goal is it's an exercise to help identify roots of discontent or confusion while also gaining clarity that's useful for defining personal vision and gaining traction in your life. So somebody asked the question, they said, can I do this drill on myself? Yes, 100% you can, and you'll actually be able to use the PDF that I sent you to help walk you through this. However, what you'll find is that if you do this exercise with a friend who is asking you questions and allowing you the opportunity to brain dump, they can serve as a really good person to help you like ask questions to yourself. And that's ultimately what this exercise is about, is it's about giving you the opportunity and the freedom to be able to throw out what you want in your life and then a step-by-step process to helping you distill that down. So I'm going to teach this as if you're the one who's facilitating this, because what I find is that I'll talk with people for a period of time, and they may be on their journey either personally as an individual or on a journey with the Lord. And eventually they hit this point where the most common phrase I hear is people will say, well, I just want what God wants me to do. And yeah, that's true. Like all of us want to do what the Lord wants us to do. However, what I've found is that when people define that as their vision for their life, what they're actually doing is either they don't know how to move forward or they're avoiding the extremely difficult work of actually coming to understand themselves. And so if you can step into this space with other people, obviously do this on your own first, with a friend. But if you can step into this space with people, what it helps them to step into what is co-laboring with the Lord, which is like, yes, the Lord has specific things that he'll have for your life. However, you will also be able to define like, okay, what are the things that really drive me so that I can partner and co-labor with that. And what I find is that people, this just brings a huge amount of clarity. So I'm going to walk through a little bit how we walk through this drill. I'm going to give you some language, and then at the end, the plan was to have somebody just throw out a few different things so I can show you how I would do this. So the first place that you'll start is if you pull up a large whiteboard. My lights are flickering. If you pull up a large whiteboard, you ideally want to have a really large space to be able to do this on, because you want to help uh, get rid of any clutter that might be in someone's mind and create just a really blank space where they feel very comfortable. So if you're going to do this exercise with someone, you come in, comfortable space, grab a sip of coffee, get really comfortable, make sure that people feel comfortable, and then you're going to start writing just down a list on one side of the whiteboard in a singular color, we'll say brown. And you're just going to say, okay, this list one, we'll go to the PDF here. This is the step-by-step. So list one, you're going to go through a brain dump. So all you do is you ask the person, I want you to list out everything that you want in your life. And we're just going to go one by one. Now, ideally, if they can list these out in smaller phrases, that's great. However, what you're trying to do in list one is just give someone the freedom to be able to say whatever they want to say. And you're going to write all these down. You want to use their exact words as you're going through it. and you want to write these in top-down list. One of the things that I found is really important is that as you're going through this drill, it's really important that you use the person's exact wording, because you want to create this space where people are free to say exactly what they feel, because this phase is pretty vulnerable, the brain dump phases. When they start talking, you want to be as quiet as possible. And the only question that you want to keep asking over and over is, okay, what else? What else? And they'll say more things. They'll say, what else? And they'll ask you a lot of questions in this phase. Like they'll say things like, okay, is it okay if I put this on? And my response is always, is that what you feel? And they'll say, well, yeah. I'm like, well, what do you think? And so you're trying to use language that's very much you focusing on them to try to help them get out whatever's in their head as they brain dump. I like to avoid using the phrase, is there anything else? As much as possible, because that kind of gives them the option to say, no, there's nothing else. I just keep saying, what else? What else? What else? And then they get to a point eventually where they get down to this list of like 30 or 40 things that they want in their life. And at the end, they'll say, no, I think that's pretty good. And then right at the very end, when they've said that's good, I'll say, is there anything else? This list one is setting the tone for openness and exploration for the rest of the exercise. So the way that we approach people in this part of the exercise is really important, that we kind of pull ourselves out of the process to make this all about them. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There's no perfect wording. Someone might say to me, this is what I think. And then they'll say, is that okay? And the question that I'll keep asking is, does it feel authentic? And they may say yeah, they may say no. And if they say no, I may say, well, what wording feels authentic to you? And then when they give me that wording, I'll write it on the board and I'll say, does that feel authentic to you? And they may say, yeah. And then, okay, we'll move on. So this first list is the opportunity for someone to dream. We want to affirm that there are no right and wrong answers, and help them to move out of timidness and kind of like the vulnerability of really opening up, because they're telling you, in some cases, really deep things in their heart. And you want to affirm their vulnerability and also encourage authenticity in this stage. So the brain dump will be pretty difficult to start with a lot of people, but as they get rolling, it'll actually feel really energizing. People will be like, wow, like I'm dreaming about things. This person really is, they'll kind of test you from time to time. Many people will, where they'll say something that feels kind of vulnerable and they don't really know that they're testing you. But when they give you something that feels uncomfortable, your response in that space allows them permission or makes them close off as to whether or not this space is really about them, or if you're actually trying to insert some of yourself into their process. So once you get all the way down to the bottom of that list, I have to admit someone else. Once you get down to the bottom of that first list, you will shift over to list number 2. So you want to make sure that people have enough space to really conclude, like, yeah, I'm done. And this list can take anywhere from, I've seen it take some people 10 minutes, and in some people I've taken, about a half hour just to get through the whole brain dump phase. And so once we get to that part, we get to the refining ideas phase, which is list number 2. So to get rid of any mental clutter, we've got this list all in, we'll say brown. And then when you start writing this list, you're going to switch colors completely on the whiteboard to create something that visually separates between the two. So for list number 2, you'll start refining ideas, and you'll ask the person to refine their brain dump by taking any 2 or 3 phrases in list number 1 and try to combine them into a singular phrase. And so they'll be able to start pointing things out where they'll say, you know what, maybe this and this, I could actually sum it up by saying this one phrase right here. And they'll start doing that with 2 or 3 phrases at a time so that you have a condensed list for list number 2. And as you go through that, you want to be as silent as possible and let them kind of verbally walk through their story. So the first part was them dreaming a little bit, and they'll tell you some of their story. The second list, when they start coming down, they'll start walking through why a couple of those items may actually go together. And you want to allow them that space to be able to talk it out, because that's them actually figuring out that some of these ideas that they thought were really disjointed actually have common themes. So moving over to list 2 is the first time that in this exercise, people are starting to say, oh, these things that I thought were actually pretty random, actually have some common ground. And the main difficulty of this list is really allowing people to find that first connection point, that there are common roots. This list number 2, I find is usually the easiest of this whole exercise, but it does help them to engage with when you condense down a little bit further, because they're starting to get the idea of, okay, well, how do I reword that? Now, a couple of different things can happen in this list number 2. One is that they may find, like I'll think about one of mine. So when I did mine, one of the things on my list was I want to be able to travel whenever I want to. And another one of the ones on my list were I want to make a lot of money. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I want to make a lot of money. And what I found was that those two could actually be summed down into I want flexibility in my life. And allowing people room. Sometimes people will identify two items and they're like, I think those two go together. And you want to allow them to talk through it. And if they seem like they're kind of getting stuck, you can say, hey, can I make a suggestion about something I may see together? And they may allow that, they may not want to. I'll usually say, can I make a suggestion? If not, totally cool. But, I have something I may help. And then I'll say, do you feel like the word flexibility feels authentic to you? Or does that not really encompass this? I'm giving them options. I'm saying I could be totally wrong. This is your process. That's fine, but maybe this will be helpful. Sometimes they say yeah, and sometimes I think I'm spot on. Like in my head, I'm like, these two totally fit together. And they'll come up with a phrase that I never expected, but to them it feels authentic. And it's my place to say, all right, great. Is that the word that you want to write? And they'll say, yeah, and then we write it down. So it's really allowing yourself to be kind of like a participant, but it always defaults to whatever they want to put on and whatever wording, however they want to put it. Once you get done with list 2, so you've crossed off all the words from list 1, you've come to a condensed one, then you're going to move over to list 3, and this one starts to get a lot more complicated again. So again, you'll want to use a totally different color. So if you've got brown and then you've got orange, now you're going to move over to, let's say, red. And in list 3, you're going to ask the person to refine again by combining the items from list 2 to form a shorter list. You want to use a different color, like I said. And this list number 3 is going to require a lot more interaction from you, because now we're not just condensing some words that, we've practiced going from list 1 to list 2. But now what we're going to find is that because this second list has already been condensed, is that you're going to have a lot more combinations that actually require completely new phrases or words. So this is about helping people come up with the idea that is encapsulated by 2 or 3 items from list 2. You want to try to resist giving ideas specifically, and you want to, again, encourage this person to verbally walk through the ideas while you listen. And you want to listen for key phrases that pop up over and over again, because usually by phase 3, you'll start hearing repeated phrases that start popping up, and they'll actually give you the language that feels authentic for them. Because by the time you get down towards the last phrase, they should be on language that feels very authentic. And I'm always surprised by what we get to, the wordings that different people come up with, even though they might be saying very similar things as other people I've been through this drill with. Everybody has a different set of language. So at this point, when you get to list 3, it might be appropriate to say, are there any ideas from list 2 that actually feel less important? Or do these ideas deserve to be moved directly over to list 3? So when we go to list 3 is the first time that I'll actually give people the option to like directly cross items off their list. And people have the freedom to do this whenever they want to, but I might suggest this at this point. If someone's having a really hard time recategorizing, I'll say, hey, is it possible that this idea just doesn't make its way over to list 3? Maybe do you feel like it's authentic to you to cross this off? Or do you feel like this is important enough to you that you want to move this over to list 3 untouched? And they might say, yes, no, whatever, but you want to create that space. The person may be surprised that some of the things that they thought were really important when they were at list 1 are actually way less important than they thought they are. And this is all part of the clarifying process. By the time you get to list 3, some people will already be down to somewhere between 1 to 3 core drivers. And by the end of this exercise, you're really just trying to get down to no more than 3 items, because when you get over 3, you're clouding it up a little bit. And if that's where you are, that's okay. You can stop the drill right there and just go on to the end. But I find most people need to move on to probably at least a 4th list. And then this 4th list, this one is really difficult because you've got almost everything off your board. You're probably down to like 4 or 5 things, but you're continuing to say, okay, I know this is hard, but we've got to work hard here to get this down to less than 3. So you want to ask the person to refine again, and you want to acknowledge like, hey, I know this is going to be really difficult, but we really want to get down to like bare bones right at the bottom. And if you can get to 1 to 2, that's even better. Like I've never seen anyone go less than 2, but if you can get down to 2, that would be amazing. But we'll allow a 3. So the goal is to find no more than 3. And these ideas will feel like they're at the core of who they are. When you get down to this point and you get 3 items on the list, people will look at that and they'll have like this moment of clarity as they start connecting with what's actually written on the board. But you want to take some space to allow them to make that connection point as they look at them and then start processing what they've actually written. And it's all their ideas that they've written up there. So if you do get to list 5, you can ask the person, how do you feel about what remains on the board, and encourage them to think about if the wordings that they've come up with really resonate with them as being true. So now we're at the point where you've helped somebody condense their brain dump. This is all their words, and they've condensed it down and down and down and down until they've gotten to 1 to 3 things. And then now is the time to help people understand what they've just done. So I'm just going to read what I wrote here, and then I'll give you guys some tips, and then I'll do my best to see if we can pull up the whiteboard. And if there's someone who would be willing to volunteer to just do a shorter version of this exercise, I think it'd be really helpful for everybody. So when you get down to the core drivers, this is the moment where some of these drivers get to really sink in and come home. And so you might say something like, the items on this board can be called your core drivers. All the things you wrote in the brain dump have these needs, your core drivers, at their root. It's important to acknowledge how important these core drivers are to you. And that is true. Like this is where you're going to help people understand that this is literally the foundation of their wants, their needs, their actions, the things that they've been doing. These, outside of inner healing, because there's an inner healing guy on here, but if we're talking about forward trajectory, what defines your behavior, these are at the root of all the things that you do. These are the things that you must have or be working toward in your life right now, for who you are right now. While these things will change many times in your life, understand that no matter what you do or where you are, if you conclude that you're not achieving these things, or that these core drivers are being validated, then you will be discontent, unhappy, irritable, angry, or feel like you're just floating without any foundations. Your core drivers are so important to you that if you're in an environment that violates your core drivers, such as your work environment, different friendships you have, your family, church situation, any of those, you might even find yourself moving towards depression or high levels of anxiety. And instead of trying to, blame specifically work or blame specifically friends or, whatever, understand that it's because these core drivers are being violated. And if you pause to think about which of these core drivers may be violated, then you might actually find your way out of some of these negative feelings. You can also use your core drivers. This is the second part that you're telling the person that you're helping. You can also use your core drivers to help you define your vision. That means that you have limitless practical options for living out your core drivers. That's up to you, but whatever you decide to do, you must do things that help you fulfill what drives you as an individual. You can think of this as your current hardware, some of these core drivers, while the way you work this out may be your software application. So I'll give a practical example. So one of my core drivers is flexibility, right? That it still remains to this day. So if I'm in I'll say with my business, if I'm in a situation where my business starts to lock me in and my schedule starts to get hyper restrictive and I no longer feel like I have the flexibility to be able to move my schedule around, like my son just graduated middle school If my business made it so that I couldn't go, didn't have the flexibility to go to those things, it doesn't matter how successful my business is, I'm going to be unhappy because flexibility is such a core driver for me. And it's the same thing with, if I don't know, Natalie and I want to continue taking different trips to go and do different types of things. If my business is not helping me develop the flexibility to be able to do that over time, I will have to change what I'm doing because it's violating a core driver. And all of us can go for a period of time with those core drivers being violated, but eventually they always get to us because it's kind of the foundations of who we are. So I want to go on to, and so at that point too, so you give these to people, you allow them to take a snapshot of the whiteboard so that they can see their own work that they've done. And what I find is that people go back and they review that board and they use it as a route to be able to say, okay, remember when I said like one of my core drivers is to have a home or to have a house? Sorry, one of the things in my brain dump was to have a house. What I really found out is that it's to have stability. And so whenever I feel like this kind of distraction that my main goal is to get a house, like, yeah, I can have that, but remember that the driver of this is stability. So I'm going to examine my life for instabilities. And oh, by the way, I do want to have a house. And so one of the parts of my vision is going to be to acquire it, whatever that means. And what you'll find as you take people through these is that these core drivers take a while to sink in, but for the people who really take it seriously, it'll be a process of usually around like I find like 2 months that people are getting new revelations of how much this core driver thing uh, has been important to them. It's just been sitting in the background the whole time. So some quick tips that I want to throw out. So that's the whole exercise. So some quick tips that I want to throw out that are really helpful is one, that you as the facilitator are going to be really vital in this role to creating the open space, and then to also ask the types of questions that will help to pull people's own answers out of themselves, and then also helping to guide them as to how important these core drivers are. But for my quick tips, so I do not allow everything, right? But inevitably, when people who want to serve the Lord will want to go through this drill, they'll inevitably get to a point where this say something like, "I just want to do what God wants." And I know I hit in this right at the beginning, but it's really important because that base desire is so good and so right. However, people do use that as a way to avoid the responsibility of deep diving their heart, and they don't most people don't do it intentionally, right? This isn't like a blame game part. It's the best that people knew how to do with the tools that they were given. But your goal in this space is to give people better tools. I won't say better tools, I'll say more specific tools to be able to get further than where they've been their whole lives. And what I found is specifically with people who have spent a lot of their time following the Lord, is that ends up being a pretty big roadblock for people. And I've taken a couple people through this who can't get off the part of, I want to do what God wants, despite me saying like, hey, this is for you to explore you. And the realization that they actually have the freedom to be able to say what they want is pretty world changing for people, to say like, hey, I understand, totally get it. Also understand that you were built with desires and and wants, like you were hardwired that way, and it's actually really good. So I want to invite you to explore that, and it's okay for you to explore that without kind of a disclaimer. And that seems to really help people a lot. With language, so I will say things a lot like, does that language feel authentic to you? I'll say what else a lot, and I'll also say over and over that there are no right or wrong answers. And a lot of times I'll even say, if people are really having a hard time opening up in this conversation, I'll have to say something like, hey, I don't care what the results of this are. Like, it doesn't affect me at all. Like, I don't care. You can this is your story, not mine. It doesn't matter to me at all. This drill is for you, and really try to create a separation. And sometimes that may sound almost uncaring, but I'm really in this space for the person that I'm taking it through. So I have, in a couple of cases, had to take it to the extreme where I'm like, hey, I don't care where you end up on this. It doesn't matter to me. And that creation of separation can help people open up. The facilitator's internal posture, so you, would be service. So I'm here to serve you. Detaching from their outcome, which I talked about before. You want to help them find themselves. You have to detach your opinion of what's right and what's wrong in this situation to allow them to explore. The facilitator questions want to draw information and get out of the person's way as they explore themselves. And then again, a really good tool is making sure that when you do write on the board, that it is the exact words that they gave you, even if you feel like it's too many or too little, or something could have been worded differently, with the exception of someone may say something and you write it down. And if you've caught something somewhere during the drill where they're using language that seems a little bit more authentic, you can say, hey, does it feel authentic to say this in this way? Or does it feel more authentic to say the way you just said it? And then they'll give you their answer. And then again, so when you go back to the final teaching part, it's important to emphasize these core drivers are what drive your behavior. And then if these are violated or unmet, then it can drive you. As I use words, depression and anxiety, because they are hard-hitting words, because I want to help people understand, like, this is a really, really, really big deal if these core drivers are violated, because there's a lot of ways that people or situations can encroach on our personal space, and we handle them pretty well or pretty easily. And you might brush them off or whatever, but the core drivers, the ones that are at the foundation of who you are, um, can drive you into deep emotional states in either direction. And this can sometimes be where either boundaries come into play, and or the person can pause to examine, is a core driver being violated? And in that case, how can I take my mind captive in that situation and understand what exactly is being violated so that I can move forward? So let's try to do, I don't know if anyone is willing to volunteer for part of this, but let's try to see if I can scribble on this whiteboard. Is there anybody who would be willing? Hannah nominated Jake. Good. It sounds like Jake is willing. Can you guys see that? See the whiteboard up right now? Give me a thumbs up. Jordan, can you see the whiteboard? See it? Okay. All right. Is there anybody who is willing? And what I'm asking to do is, if anybody is willing to just give 10 things. Matt Sankey is. All right. Thanks, Matt. If you can just unmute. And so all I'd like you to do is just give 10 things that you want in your life. And let me see if I can. Holy cow, someone's gone rogue. Oh, here we go. Okay. So Matt, can you unmute and just say, all right, someone's going nutty right now. Can you unmute and just, I'll ask you this kind of like I would if I were sitting down with someone, and we'll just role play this for a second and
Sure.
see if this can be helpful. So I don't know how to erase. Anyway, we'll just go from here. All right, Matt. So all right. So this driver is called the core drivers test. And all we're going to do is I just want to create a space where we can kind of try to figure out what it is that drives you. Like, how does Matt tick? And so the very first exercise that we're going to do is I'm just going to have you go through it. And I just want to know, what are the things that you want in your world? Like, what does Matt want? And that can be, it can be future. But why don't you just give me a few different things?
Yes. So some of the things that I would want is, you kind of mentioned this earlier, I would like flexibility. I'd like to have a community. I'd like to have a creative space. I'd like to have a family. Um, I'd like to help be involved with biblical community things. So um, whether that's leading a study, I want to be involved with music, like rap, worship, and also um, design. So like board game design. So very kind of like that creative space. And this might compound into what you had mentioned earlier. So 10 things here. Oh, I've got the. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I could scribble on here too. My bad.
Okay. So normally
Yeah.
what I would do here is I would keep saying, okay, what else, what else, what else? But for right now, for this exercise, Matt, so I'll ask you the question and be like, is there anything else that you feel like belongs on this list? And you pretend like you're at the end of it.
Yes, I do feel like that. Something belongs.
You do feel like what?
Yes.
Yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah.
pretend like we're at the end of the list and you've already said everything.
Oh, okay. No, I don't think so.
Okay. So when you look at this list that you've brain dumped, then as you read over this again, so as you look at this and you're saying like what we have up here is those are all the things that you can think of that like in Matt's world, total brain dump, that's exactly what you want. There's nothing you feel like you would want to add to it.
Yes.
Okay. So now what we're going to do is move over to a second list. And Matt, when we walk through this, I just want you take a look at that first list, and we're just going to start condensing things down a little bit. So if there's any words that you feel like you could kind of combine to make a new word, just tell me what they are, and then we're going to move on the second list. And what would be either a new phrase that you would move over to the second list, or maybe you find two items like, I don't know, maybe for you, flexibility and creative space go together. Would there
Hmm.
be, would there be a new word that would define those, or maybe it just goes under flexibility? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I feel like community and family and like biblical community could go together. What
Fam-
that word would. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, community and family, and then sorry, there was another one, or just those two?
Just being involved with biblical community. So the one right below family.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to cross these off, and what phrase do you feel like kind of sums those up for you?
Um, so I would probably put that as, I guess in general it'd be relationships, but it's something a little bit deeper. So probably authentic relationships. Um, I don't know if that is the right answer for that. So
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, so a community, a family, and being involved with biblical community things. So what's I guess just tell me a little bit more about what is when you wrote community up there, what did that mean to you?
So that means family and friends that are able to grow spiritually together and be vulnerable with each other, help each other in weaknesses, and encourage each other and lift each other up. Um, that's how I defined it. Probably very similar to the other point I wrote down there.
Okay. And you're saying that's similar to a family?
That would be similar to the being involved with biblical community things.
Okay. And then when you
Yeah.
wrote a family, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more the authentic relationships because what I heard you saying was you're not totally sure if that wording is right. So I'm just trying to, get a little bit more thoughts on this. When you wrote a family, I guess what were your thoughts there? What were you thinking about?
I was thinking more of just personally having a family with children, but then also having a family that is is able to, I guess, have a impact in the community where we live.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of more my thoughts with that. And feel free if you have an idea um, of thoughts, free to throw that in as well. I'm just going off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, so just with some of the things that you just mentioned about, community, family, being involved with the neighborhood, all that, do you feel after talking through that kind of out loud, do you feel like authentic relationships is the word that you would use there, or is there something that feels a little bit more authentic for you?
It might be a different word, and honestly, I don't know what that would be right now.
Okay.
But it could be, uh, I guess, yes and no. So sorry to be confusing with that.
Okay, so this is an example of how this shorter one that we're doing, because we haven't fleshed all these out, is kind of limited because if I'd given Matt space to talk through each of these as he was brain dumping, there would have been a lot of information that had been coming out. And so by the time we got to this second list, he'd have a really good understanding. But because the brain dump list is a little bit challenge right now, and I haven't given him enough time to talk through it. I don't have enough of that foundational information. So this is actually a really good example of why it's so important to spend so much time on the first list. Is someone Matt in the first list may say flexibility, and I'd say, okay, yeah, help me understand, like, where is that in your world? And he would tell me some of that story. And it would start to have him really brain dumping in a different way, where this list would turn into, probably from Matt, just what he was saying, this list would probably be 40 or 50 items long. And so Matt's a person who I would probably get to like 5 or 6 lists with, actually. So we'll just continue on as if we'd done the whole thing. All right, Matt. So we've got
Yeah.
4 more things over on list one.
Yep.
Are there any of those that you feel like we could push together?
I feel like a creative space and um, the music, rap, worship, and also the board game design. I feel like all those three could be tied into, um, I don't know what that word would be exactly. So I guess just freedom to create, which is creative space as well. So I don't know if that's cheating if I use one of the things that I wrote down.
Does that feel authentic to you?
Yes.
That wording? Okay. And then what was the wording that you felt like you wanted to put up there?
Let's just uh, freedom to create.
And then so Matt, for this second list, we're not trying to condense down too far. I see that you have flexibility over on this first list. Does that feel like it's something that can go over to the second list all on its own?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so now we would go to a third list, which is, where we condense down a little bit more. I do want to just maybe walk through this just for a second and see if we can get somewhere farther. So, Matt, we've got 3 words on this list right now. Are there any of these words that you feel like we could mush together, or do you feel like these are 3 totally separate categories that kind of need their own space?
I think those kind of need their own space, just off the top of my head.
Okay. And then just if I could ask a question about it, again, these are your answers, so you can take this wherever you want to. Freedom to create and then flexibility seem like they're pretty close in intention there. Do you feel like those could be mushed together at all? Or do you feel like those both need to make their way onto the next list just as they are? Is flexibility different for you than a freedom to create?
Um, I would say, I guess you could combine those. Flexibility to me was more about like uh, working and life balance, and then freedom to create is just having the time to, I guess, the disciplined time to do that. So, yes, you could probably combine both of those two things.
Okay. And so, I just when you're talking through this, it sounds a little bit what I don't want to do is I don't want to push you in a direction. So I'll just ask again, do you I want to make sure I'm not trying to force you to put 2 things together. So do you
No,
feel
you're good.
like it feels authentic for you to push those 2 together?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were going to do that, what is the word that you would put in this next list to sum those 2 up?
Um, let's see. I don't know exactly. I'm open to suggestions though. Something of like, um, again, kind of one of those words like just freedom and flexibility, I suppose.
Okay. And do freedom and flexibility, do those feel differently to you? Do those feel like those need to be defined differently?
Yes, I feel like freedom would be defined as um, part of it is like financial freedom,
Hmm.
and then also freedom to travel. I know that's something that you'd mentioned,
Hmm.
and then the I guess flexibility to create. So sorry, they're getting kind of similar and mushed in here, but yeah, I'd say freedom would be more of like um, financial,
Hmm.
and then flexibility could go into more of like uh, traveling and then creating.
Okay. So if I got to this point with somebody, I would to me, freedom and flexibility are very similar, but to Matt, they mean different things. And so again, if we had done this whole list right at the beginning, it probably would have fleshed out a little bit differently and felt a little bit more clearly. But what I would do at this point, because his language is telling me that I think I'm pushing him in a direction a little bit too much, I would just leave these three. And so if I transition to this part, I'd say, so Matt, these three things, based on what we've gone through, are kind of your core drivers. So what this is suggesting is that if you're in a space in your life where you're not developing authentic relationships, maybe those relationships feel like they're less than authentic, or they feel shallow or whatever, that's going to cause a real issue for you. And because you're always going to be wanting that. Same thing with freedom to create. If you don't have the freedom to do that, if all your time is stifled, that can create those issues. And if you don't have flexibility, all of those can create that. And then we could talk about some of the things that he's been doing in his life and say, basically on the path forward, whatever you choose to do next, you are going to need, as a human being, you're going to need to be actively developing authentic relationships. You're going to need to actively have the freedom to create, and you're going to need to have flexibility in your life, or you're going to be discontent. So when you're sitting down to write the
Yeah.
vision of where you're going, make sure that these things are all accounted for. And you can do this however you want. You can, I don't know, authentic relationships. You can start a house church, or you can, make sure you go to the Roll-A-Rama every Friday night. But
Hmm.
that has to be somewhere in your bubble, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good.
All right, so we're done with that part. So I will just open it up for some questions if anybody has them. Once I learn how to shut this whiteboard down, and we know how to turn the whiteboard off. There we go. So does anybody have any questions? We'll, give. I'll if people have more questions, then I can always stay on here longer, but we'll allot for at least 10 minutes, and then obviously if anybody needs to go ahead and dip out. But if anybody has any questions, just unmute and let me know what your questions are. Or if you have any comments, maybe people that you're thinking about taking through this.
Hey Nate, it's
Eh,
Jamie. Hey, I was wondering, I mean, I know you're teaching us as a larger group right now, but have you ever done this with a bigger group where they're actually writing the list and they're going through the steps themselves and you're kind of facilitating the group?
so I've done versions of it where somebody will do a demo, but this is a very intimate exercise. And
Mm.
I find that the value of having a facilitator there, or someone who can be one-on-one, is because especially when you go through that first list, it takes someone individually speaking to you to be able to go through and help draw some of these things out.
Mhm.
Because this core drivers test is navigating blind spots. And so I don't know what's going on with my power right now. It's navigating blind spots. And so doing that in a group setting, I've not done, but I don't feel like it would be um, as valuable unless you know a way of being able to do it.
I don't. I'm just trying to figure out how I can use this with my clients, and because I imagine how much I apologize, I missed part of the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
Um, but typically, how much time do you spend with an individual to like work through all of this?
That's a good question. So the fastest I've been able to do it is an hour. And average time is probably 1.5 to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
it's a pretty intensive thing. But if you spend that time, it creates a pretty big ripple effect, pretty
Yeah.
positive effect. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, Hannah said, I can't unmute, but I have a question. How does one answer honestly if they have high regard for obedience. In other words, their desire for obedience and partnering with God's will is paralyzing when it comes to going in a direction confidently with goals. So Hannah, there's I think I'm going to try to feel free to, I'm looking at the chat, but feel free to interject. So what I have found is that when I talk to people their basic modus operandi is I want to make sure I'm obeying God. Like I remember we talked once upon a time about I think it was Moses, who someone who talked about basically I won't leave here unless your presence goes with me. Was that Moses? Jordan? Okay. Thanks. So I've heard that kind of I absorbed that message for a long time as basically paralyzing fear of if I go to do a thing or take a step, then his presence won't go with me, kind of a thing. And so what I end up finding is that again, indwelling Holy Spirit, Lord's with us. What I've done personally has been like, God, I mean, I don't have direction right now, but I'm going to step forward. I love you. And if I'm doing something the wrong way, like make it clear. Like I don't have direction for how to step forward. So I'm going to step forward. But if I step in a wrong direction, I invite you to correct me immediately. And, God has done that gently in a lot of different situations. But I've had several people who have talked about exactly what you're talking about, where they want to obey God, they want to walk in obedience, they want to make sure that their steps are forward. And what they end up getting in is this place of paralyzing, but it's paralyzing fear that they'll miss what God wants them to do. And God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. And so part of this is really stepping into what I like to call the co-labor of recognizing like, wow, it's actually okay for me. It's okay for me to dream. And when it talks about, I'm sorry, it's late, so my brain is fizzling out a little bit. But uh, there's some scriptures that talk about like the human mind, the human heart or whatever being deceptive, but also we're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, our mind, and our strength. And this is a really beautiful way of engaging our mind with that process that we do have permission to do. And so what I end up doing is having to invite people into that space of basically saying like, hey, I want to affirm that like God hardwired you and he did it pretty well. And so what we're actually doing here is we've been praying a lot, kind of like upward, God, tell us what to do. But now what we're actually inviting you to do is to actually really engage with your heart, soul, and mind and to take the time to engage internally to find out how we're actually hardwired. And in my mind, that's actually the best type of partnership when we can really understand how we're hardwired and then also understand in prayer where God is taking us. And now we have this place where we've taken up that responsibility of understanding how he's wired us to dig that gold out so that we can step forward. And so that place of permission, I think, is a place that I step into a lot with people is like, hey, I want you to know, like you actually have permission. And there was actually back in January, I was in Atlanta with you. I just watched Willy Wonka, and Willy Wonka just like crushed me in the best way possible. It was so dumb, but it was great actually, because it got to the part where he gets to the end of the movie and Timothy Chalamet, who's Willy Wonka, he sings the song where it says, "Come with me and you'll see a world of pure imagination. Reach out and touch what was once just in your imagination." And as I was listening to that song play, again, it's Willy Wonka, but I was just being invited in pretty deeply um, to dream with the Lord and to use my imagination. And I find that a lot of people need that invitation, especially people who really want to do their best to serve him. We live from a place of abiding. Jamie said, when we live from a place of abiding, what is the difference between my desires and his? We're one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's, that's a great point too, actually. So I imagine that a lot of you are going to be doing this exercise. By the way, if you're in a place where you're like, hey, I don't really know uh, who to go through this exercise with, and you guys want to go through this exercise with me, I'm more than happy to do that. It's just going to require us to find a time where we can set aside 2 hours and go through it, and it can really help, empower you to do it. But what you'll find is that there are some people who are a lot more open to exploring themselves, and then there are other people who are going to have certain blockades that are up. And if you're working with somebody who has been, I'll say it this way, the easiest people to get through this drill with are people who are relatively new believers. And what I find is that when I do this exercise with people who have spent a lot of years, either in kind of religious mindsets, or they've been encouraged that dying to self is actually wiping your brain of who you are, or that dying to self is somehow like disengaging from the person that you were made to be. um, and those are the hardest people to kind of help through this process, because there's this mental blockade of, if I explore who I am and acknowledge that it was made pretty good, that I'm somehow disconnecting from the will of God. And so that encouragement is hugely releasing for people to understand, like, you were designed by God, and you've been taught that you've been taught that that these things that are hardwired into you are all basically wrong somehow. On the other side of this is a place where people step into different levels of freedom, um, because they value who they are. And I think there's room for scripture here in this too. When Jesus says, he talks about what are the most important commandments. It's love God, and then love your neighbor, as yourself. And so what I find is that as people go through this drill, they learn this new level of being able to dream with the Lord, and step forward into him. And it gives them actually a higher value for self, which in turn gives them more opportunity to be able to show up for other people in ways that are really life-giving. And that obviously works its way out in a lot of different ways. But when we can get to a place where we really value deeply, like, man, my core drivers are a lot different than yours, and that's okay, and we're actually still running and co-laboring with God, then it creates this new trajectory in this new life. And actually, what I find is that when people, going back to what you were saying about the obedience, I'll call it complex, that's not the right wording, but what I find is that people can't actually define vision, because they're so and when I say this was me for a long time too, until somebody took me through this drill, and it freed all that up. They can't actually define vision because they're too afraid to dream, because they're concerned that that dream will then step outside of the will of God. And what I actually see is more of an invitation to, like, hey, Nate, I want you to dig through and find the stuff I put into you so that we can actually co-labor. Jamie said, my clients express a lot in so many words. What happens if I get it wrong? Yeah, they're so concerned about not being in the will of God. It's really rooted in fear. But I've just learned that God will course correct. He cares more about my heart if obedience than getting it right. Yeah, that's really good. And this is one of those drills too. Like, so if what you're talking about doing, Jamie, yeah, this is one of those drills that helps people internalize that lesson in a much deeper way, because what will happen is when people get down to their core drivers, I took somebody through this recently, and one of their core drivers is, I want to know people and I want to be known. That was the phrasing that felt authentic to them. And what they started finding out is that they were having some relational issues that they were working through. And at its root was, they felt like if people reacted a different way, that it meant that she wasn't being known or wasn't being heard. And so she goes into relationships now knowing that that's one of her core drivers. And if she ever gets into a situation where, that feels like she's not being known or being pushed to the side, she reconnects with that. And she's like, wait a second, but they do want to know me. And it helps to, reconnect her back in. So maybe I'll make time for one more question if anybody has them, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. I just had a bunch of people coming to my house for prayer. These guys pray until like 4 o'clock in the morning. I go to sleep by then. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me on this. And if anybody didn't get the PDF, you can always reach back out. I'll put the actual, maybe I'll try to, I don't know, pull up emails or whatever. Just I'll say it this way. If you guys want this teaching and want to be able to share it, just send me an email, do skydivelife@gmail.com, or reach out to me on Facebook. And I'll send you the link. And then again, if any of you guys want to go through this drill with me, I'll actually walk you through it and facilitate you through it, so that, you know, you can experience it, but then also so that you can be better empowered to take other people through it. And that being said, I'll see you guys later. Have a great night. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll talk to you guys soon.